Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The polls have closed in the U.S. midterm elections in what some have called the most important midterms in U.S. history. What are the results? What is at stake? And what does the recent wave of tech industry layoffs tell us about the country's economy? To find out more, I'm glad to be joined by Dr. Zhao Hai, Research Fellow of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Professor John Gong from the University of International Business and Economics, and Joanne Cheng, intercultural critic and author, and Rick Dunham, former White House correspondent for Business Week. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qianduo. Welcome to the discussion. John, I will start with you. What do you make of the results? Are the results in any way a surprise?
I think it is a surprise to a lot of Republicans. It was not as like a landslide victory for the GOP as it was promoted by the GOP, and also as it was anticipated. I think the Fetterman's win in Pennsylvania, the flip in Pennsylvania for the Senate seat is certainly a big surprise. But to be honest with you, it's not a surprise to me. So let me first also give you an assessment of the current situation in the Senate. In my view, the Senate is in the Democrats' bag right now. I mean, there are three states that haven't been declared yet, but a couple of more. But I think the most hopeful states for Democrats: Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada. If Democrats win two of them, it got 50 votes. 50 votes in the Senate, 50 seats in the Senate. Mark Kelly is having a comfortable lead in Arizona. So I think Arizona is already in the bag. So what's left is Nevada and Georgia. Currently, Cortez Masto is trading by about like 20,000 votes in Nevada. It might be a tough catch-up in my view, but even if Democrats lose Nevada, the election in Georgia is going to a runoff anyway on December the 6th. And given the fact that Warnock is leading by a small percentage point in Georgia, and also given the prospect that independent vote, about 2% of the votes are going to the independent. Most of it, in my view, are also going to go to Democrats. So I think in the runoff, Warnock is going to win. This is a very special senator. He got this seat the first time in 2020 through a runoff. And I think this time he's going to get his seat again through another runoff. So it's kind of extraordinary in my view. But overall, I think in the end, it's going to be 50-50. Democrats still control the Congress by the Harris vote.
Mm-hmm. Well, Joanne from New York, so there are gains for the Republicans, but probably not as much as expected?
Absolutely. The red wave is yet to come. And so far, we were hoping Zelton is going to win, but we still have 1.4 million votes. The same day votes are to be counted, so we have to be just a little bit patient. But it seems to be Hochul is leading.
Mm-hmm. Rick, so there was more or less a kind of expectation there will be like a red wave, but now some say it's more like a red ripple.
I think that's a good way to put it. This breaks historical rules, or at least historical norms for losses for the party in power. And I would say at the Senate, it is the low end of expectations. I had said between 0 change and pickup of 2 for Republicans. I mean, I was surprised by the House. I was surprised that Republicans were expected. I mean, even low estimates where they pick up 20 seats, and now, I mean, I think that they would be so happy if the still undecided races gave them anything like that. I mean, the issue at this point is control, and nobody ever would have thought we would wake up the day after the election and Republicans would not yet be in control. So I think that Donald Trump bears a lot of responsibility. He endorsed many extreme candidates in primaries who won their primaries and then became easier for Democrats to beat. So I mean, there has to be a reason that this has defied historical norms, and I think that you have to blame bad candidate selection by the voters in the Republican primaries, where they picked extreme candidates who denied the truth about the 2020 election, and centrist voters voted against them.
Mm-hmm. So Joanne, Donald Trump is to blame?
absolutely no. The red wave is actually, I mean, we still have hope. We should never lose sight of what's actually needed in American history. This is about to be a turning point. There's quite a few states are doing very well, such as Florida and Arkansas, and I see great hope in hoping to have this absolute victory. But I know we have these two parties they're in a power struggle right now. But Donald Trump is not to blame. We're still hoping that he's going to regain where he belongs, so that America has returned to its Renaissance revival.
Zhao Hai, this is a midterm election in the U.S. People say it's one of the most important, if this most important midterms. And also, if you look at the costs, for example, the commercials, spent by the candidates, and also, out of the 6 living U.S. presidents, 4 of them were on the campaign trail. Obviously, it is a lot at stake. Tell us, what does this midterms mean for the country and why it is so important?
Well, I think this midterm election is particularly important because the past 3 years are abnormal in American history because the U.S., not only the U.S., but the world was hit by the pandemic. In the last Trump administration, the U.S. is generally moving towards the GOP, and there's a general trend moving towards more nationalistic and populistic political trend. However, this was disrupted, and Trump was limited to 1 term. However, the Biden administration is not welcomed right after he took office, and so far his approval rating in the U.S. is quite low. It's actually as low as Trump during his midterm election. So this time, the midterm is actually deciding whether or not the U.S. is following the previous trend and moving further toward the right, or the course has been corrected and it's going to move towards the left, or even probably, like this midterm election has already shown us, it's going to maintain the centrist road. So far, if you look at the exit poll, it's quite interesting because the Trump effect is not showing up. Like the previous speaker said, there's no red wave. And there are a couple of reasons. One is, of course, Trump's charm may not work anymore any longer, and his pick, like Rick has stated, his pick of candidates is not as good as could be. But the other factor is that since 2018, early voting has been a major pattern or major way to vote in the United States. Right now, even though this year, 2022 midterm, is much less than the 2 years ago, 2020, however, it's still 5 million more votes than 2018. And that's why I think prior to the election, the polls underestimated the Democrats' vote. So at this point, I think the changing pattern of American voting is impacting current politics.
John, obviously, if you look at the campaigns from the Democrats and the Republicans, it's like there are 2 versions of America, for the future. They have different ideas. Is that the reason we see, many people see there's a lot at stake for the country?
Well, absolutely. There's an absolute discrepancy of
John, please,
understanding
from Israel.
reality here.
John, please.
Yes, I believe the Democrats and the Republicans
so each party pick
totally. So the 2 parties has a different understanding.
Each party picks it.
Professor Gong, go ahead.
Okay, so each party picks up a theme that is in its advantage. The Democrats are talking about the election. They're talking about Donald Trump's sabotage to democracy, the election denial stuff, and Republicans are paying attention, raising the issue about inflation, about economy. But I think these are the issues that American people are concerned about. But I think at the end of the day, it's a fact that Donald Trump's political career is finished in the United States. He is unwinnable. People he approves are generally unwinnable. I think he would be lucky if the Justice Department didn't go after him. So I think we can hope and hope, but the reality on the ground is that look at congressional districts. The people he approved who are election deniers are losing one by one. And the so-called red wave is not happening. At the highest, the GOP was touting something like gaining seats of like 60 seats in the Congress. Right before the election, McConnell was talking about 30 seats gaining in the Congress. I think this time they would be lucky if they gain like 5 to 10 seats. There's nothing going on with this so-called red wave. They're getting nothing, not an inch in the Senate. So I think as far as the GOP is concerned, I think this election is a failure for them.
Mm-hmm. So, Rick, can we say there's a relief, at least, for the Democrats?
Absolutely. It's a strange thing. I sort of call it jubilation because the expectations were so low. I mean, I had dinner 2 nights ago with a former Democratic ambassador, and he had said that he expected 20 to 25 seats to be lost in the House. I mean, he was saying, well, it could be worse because we're doing better than the polls are saying publicly in the Senate. But yes, I've never seen a party so happy when they still may lose control of one house of Congress.
Right.
Because Democrats expected a disaster, and it ended up not good. They're losing seats in the House, but it's so much better than what they thought. There's a great feeling of relief.
Mm-hmm. Rick, so what are the issues people concerned the most in terms of the voting, for the senators, for the representatives, for the House, and also, of course, governors and the local officials?
Okay, that's an important question. It varies state by state. But to me, what was interesting is what they care about is what Republicans have been talking about: the economy, about inflation. But they were not necessarily voting for Republicans because of that. A lot of people who voted Democratic said that they cared about abortion rights. Abortion rights at a local level was vital in states like Wisconsin, states like Michigan, states like Pennsylvania, where Democratic governors are the only thing that stands between the voters and having a ban on abortion. And so abortion motivated Democrats in a lot of places. I mean, people care about Republican issues, crime and schools and inflation, the things Republicans talked about, but they didn't vote for the Republican candidates sufficiently to give the Republicans a victory. It's unusual in elections. Usually when people choose the issues of one party, they vote for that party in a great majority. This time, this is a different kind of election than I've seen in 40 years of covering national elections in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Well, Zhao Hai, at least we used to talk about the dividedness, division of the country. The left and the right. Republicans and Democrats. With social media, conspiracy theory, Trump rule, for example. Do you think this election somehow bring the two sides together, or the country remains as divided as in the past?
No, I don't think this election brings the two extremes together. And at this point, I don't think there's a possibility for both sides to come together. But the interesting thing is that if you look at the exit poll, the voters are sort of evenly divided into 3 categories: 1 Republican, 1 Democrat, and 1 independent. And they're quite evenly divided. So that means 1/3 of each camp. An interesting thing is that you can expect Republicans to vote Republican and Democrats to vote Democrats. However, it's the final decision is in the hands of independents. This year, what's specific is that independents actually voted more towards Democrats than the Republicans in some cases. That means that even though there are issues that is quite pro to Republicans, like the inflation, the current status of economy, the border security, crimes. However, that means that independents does not overly trust Republicans to actually correct those problems. And they still think that both parties are quite evenly distributed in terms of handling all those questions. And of course, the Democrats still has serious problems, serious concerns on climate change, on abortion rights. So that one actually promoted the Democrats to come out, the turnout, to push them to turn out. So this time, I think the result is quite interesting, not like before the election, the poll showed the Republicans would have a major or significant upper hand in this election.
Well, Zhao Hai, with this probably less than expected gain by the Republicans in the Congress, what does that mean, in terms of the impact on the future policymaking of the Biden government?
I think we could look back 10 years, right after, the midterm of Obama's administration could give lessons to the current status, because back then, Obama's administration also lost Congress, part of the Congress. And this year, I think if you look back, what would happen is that Republicans will do their best to stop any political agenda coming out of Democrats. And the Congress, the legislature will be paralyzed, and the two parties' internal fighting will escalate. And in particular, we're still waiting for the result of the Senate. If, like current trajectory, prove that Democrats will control the Senate, then it's better because they can pass more judge candidates. However, if the Senate also flips, then the Republicans, of course, will also block all candidates for the federal judges. And on many other issues, the Republicans will block the Democrats' agenda using things like debt ceiling, also the budget. They would try to push up the military budget and try to curb any welfare spending. And in particular, they would use the inflation as an excuse to cut more welfare and other federal programs. So I think there will be more and more infighting in the next 2 years, and American politics will be much more unpredictable.
John, what do you make of the impact of these elections?
Well, I think even though Republicans it looks like they're going to control the House, but I think from historical proceedings, they are not voting just with like one arm block. If you are leading by just 5, 6, 7 votes, it's quite easy, I think, to gain some votes from Republicans. Just a few, 3, 4 can flip things in a Congress. So I think with this slim margin controlled by the Republicans in the House, and also with the Senate still firmly controlled by the Democrats, I think the political agendas from White House, from Biden administration, is still quite likely to go through. There's some political pressure from the Republicans in the House, but with such a slim margin, I think it's still workable. There are those people on the Republican sides that are willing to work with Democrats. So I think I think the kind of a political gridlock is probably not going to be as severe as people think.
Well, John, if that's the case, if you look forward to, say, 2024, what do these elections mean? It's more or less like a small victory for the Democrats. Is that a good signal for President Biden's 2024 election? Or what does that mean for Trump?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say the chance of Donald Trump running again is 2024 is greatly diminished. It's pretty clear from this election that his agenda, his political thinking, his philosophy is not flying with American audience. So given that, I think it's quite interesting that probably we're going to see some new rising stars on the Democrat side, as opposed to just 100% sure Joe Biden is running. There's a rising political star. For example, the governor in Maryland, the governor from California. These people are rising stars within the Democratic Party, and I think in my view, is that it's quite likely that they probably will run in 2024. So I think we're going to see a new generation of politicians on both sides, and it's quite interesting what's going to happen in 2024.
Joanne Cheng, so is it over for Trump for 2024?
Absolutely no. We should, in face of setbacks, we should remain faithful to our goal. Our goal is to make America great again, because I think the Democratic colleagues that are not seeing reality as it is. America is encountering great inflation. Our border is open. Illegal immigrants is flooding our streets. It's no longer safe to just walk. Our safety is in danger. But the Democratic, such as our mayor here, Poco, is not even thinking that's the issue. We really need a president that sees reality as it is. No ideology of socialism or Marxism should take over it, which we need to just bring our life back as it is. We remain very hopeful. The red wave is not diminished yet. Today is only, it's only a setback. We're just going to remain hopeful, and because the American people are having the truth. And of course, truth is objective, but we do have the truth in us. So we need to carry out our goal and bring our security back, inflation down. And do not laugh. This is no laughing matter. America is at its crossroad, and China is directly related within this. This is a big competition. So therefore, we need to remain calm and remain hopeful.
But Joanne, do you think the message of make America great again or bring our life back that well received with the voters? Given this frustration, let's say.
Absolutely. I mean, for those who voted for Trump, and we remain hopeful, Biden's mouth is running wild. And he's saying that we are the threat to democracy. And he's deviate kind of from reality kind of point of view is the threat to democracy. And we need to have a strong view, believing in reality as it is. This country really is in danger. So that's why this election is crucial. Do not lose your hope, everyone. Do not think just because you're winning. So we remain firm. 2020 election was stolen, and we're not election denier, but this is the truth. We need to remain faithful, and we still are counting, and we are going to just, be hopeful.
Rick, obviously, let's say Republicans, or especially Republicans under the influence of Trump, former President Trump over there, they will remain firm, and they will remain, let's say, the firing spirit against at least the Biden administration and the Democrats over there. So can we expect for the next 2 years, the politics will be as contentious as in the past?
I do think it will remain contentious and partisan, but your audience today has had a special treat to hear from a Trump cult member who's completely divorced from reality. I think that this election was significant, and there's a big winner for the Republicans. It's Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. Republicans can see a path forward where, just like you say, they don't have to stray ideologically. They can still be nationalistic, they can still be hawkish, but they don't have to have a candidate who cannot win in a general election. And I do agree, this is going to be a new day for a new generation in both parties. Instead of 2024 shaping up as Joe Biden against Donald Trump, I think it's going to be the next generation of leaders in both parties. Congress will continue to be partisan. Congress will continue to have partisan wrangling, no matter who narrowly controls both chambers. But I do think that this election was significant. The voters sent a signal that they want something different in the Republican Party, but that this is not a big endorsement of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is not gaining. So I really do think that this election will turn around the thinking of America for 2024, not the thinking in Washington for what's going to happen in Congress in 2023.
Well, Rick, one of the factors in terms of the judgment, let's say, by the voters is economy, inflation, etc. Recently, the big tech companies, including Twitter, are announcing hiring freezes or job cuts.
Right.
What's going on with the companies, including the market capitalization? We do see there's a loss of that.
Yep.
Do you think that's a factor in people's voting here?
I don't specifically with tech. I do think fears about the future were a reason. Tech has had, number one, a correction because the valuations were way too high. They were not in touch with reality. The second is that we are entering a global recession right now, and tech is hit more because now it is much more reliant on advertising. Facebook, which is owned by Meta, Google definitely has been hit even before the change and the controversy with Elon Musk, and Google because because Google is reliant somewhat on advertising. But I think there's a correction going on. So the tech industry is now, instead of being the leader, it's leading the country into what's looking like rocky economic times for at least the next 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Well, Zhao Hai, if you look at the foreign policy making, do you think there's any impact of the midterm elections in terms of probably the U.S. policy on the Ukraine crisis or U.S.-China relationship?
Well, first of all, let me say one thing, that the game is not over, and I don't think that this is going to be a win for Democrats because, like you pointed out, the economy is still going down, and the next year, so far, the Fed is raising interest rate, and the effect will show next year. So Biden administration and Democrats still has a long way to go to defend their economic record and trying to engineer soft landing. And so far, it looks like it's more and more difficult. And coming back to foreign policy, again, I think at this point, the Republicans, in terms of their presence in the next Congress, will have a limited ability to change the foreign policy direction of the current Biden administration. And of course, Republicans has doubt about throwing money towards Ukraine and blocking any possibility of a political settlement. And even if they are in control of Congress, they will try to push for limiting the military aid to Ukraine and trying to make that accountable. However, still, we don't see at this point a possible solution if the U.S. and particularly the Biden administration continue to enforce that military aid to fight, to encourage Ukraine to continue to fight with Russia. There are other issues at stake right now, because if the Republicans come back, then of course the relationship in the Middle East, for instance, U.S. relationship with Iran will be in question. The JCPOA deal will be in danger again. And there are other things, like Republicans are pushing for border security, which will enrage some of the Latin American countries, making that relationship even more complex. We don't even mention China. I think if the Republicans come back to Congress and started hearings on the so-called origins of the pandemic or other China-related issues, of course, this is going to have a very negative impact on U.S.-China relationship. So I think we will keep tracking the changing of American foreign policy, but at this time, we still don't know exactly where a Republican House will lead the policy towards.
Mm-hmm. Joanne Cheng, obviously Republicans and Democrats, they are very, hold different views on many domestic issues. What about the foreign policy making, in particular, for example, Ukraine conflict? Will the election of or the Republicans, in particular in the Congress, somehow change the U.S. foreign policy on the Ukraine crisis? Briefly, please.
I think foreign policy includes. I think they will probably not ceaselessly sending weapons to Ukraine. I think the war will be somehow constrained. And in relation to China, I think there seems to be a very difficult path we're on, is in the hot competitive edge. So therefore, and the Republican, I believe that's the force to lead to a better future for world peace. Mm-hmm. And I think our Democratic colleagues need to have the alternative view and try not to be so close-minded.
Well, on that note, we concluded today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.